Tonight we drift back to an island that no longer holds what we are about to describe. Mauritius, once home to a bird unlike any other. This is the story of the dodo, in 100 quiet facts. The dodo lived only on Mauritius, and nowhere else on Earth. It belonged to the pigeon and dove family. Its closest living relative is the Nicobar pigeon, found across Southeast Asia, a bird that still carries faint echoes of the dodo's ancestry. The dodo stood around 1 meter tall, weighing between 10 and 18 kilograms depending on the season. It could not fly. Its wings had become small and largely unused over generations, a common pattern on isolated islands where flight loses its purpose. Before humans arrived, Mauritius had no large land predators. Without threats to escape, the dodo had no pressure to keep flying, and so its body adapted for a slower life, gathering fruit and seeds across the forest floor. Its large, hooked beak helped it break open tough fruit shells with ease. Some researchers believe this beak also allowed it to feed on the fallen fruit of the tamblecoke tree, a theory once thought to explain a deep bond between bird and tree, though later study has gently questioned it. The forest remained still. The dodo continued its slow search for fruit. Nothing hurried here. Nothing needed to. Its legs were short but sturdy, built for walking rather than running. Its feathers were grayish-brown, soft, and entirely unsuited for flight. Beneath those feathers, its body carried useful fat reserves for the shifting seasons. In wetter months, fruit grew abundant, and the dodo likely grew heavier. In drier months, it leaned on this reserve, growing leaner until rains returned. The island's forest floor, thick with palms and ferns, offered constant shade. The dodo lived without urgency, for centuries, undisturbed by anything beyond the gentle rhythm of the seasons. The name dodo likely came from Portuguese or Dutch sailors, though its exact origin remains debated among historians. Some believe it derived from a Portuguese word meaning simple or foolish, a reflection of how tame and unafraid the bird appeared to early visitors. This fearlessness was not foolishness at all, but simply the result of an island life shaped by safety. With no natural predators for thousands of years, the dodo had no instinct to flee from anything approaching it, including humans arriving for the very first time. Dutch sailors first recorded encounters with the dodo in the late 1500s, describing a large, ungainly bird that showed no fear as they walked among them. This lack of fear made the birds remarkably easy to catch, though early accounts suggest their meat was not especially prized. Sailors more often hunted the dodo out of curiosity or convenience than true culinary preference, and many early journals described the bird with a mixture of amusement and mild disdain, unaware of how quickly the species would vanish entirely. The forest remained unaware of what had arrived. The dodo continued its slow walk between fruiting trees. Nothing about that first meeting suggested how little time remained. The introduced predators that arrived alongside sailors proved far more devastating than hunting itself. Rats escaping from ships found the dodo's eggs and chicks defenseless, since the bird had never needed to guard its nest before. Pigs and monkeys, brought ashore intentionally or by accident, also raided nests, adding further pressure to a population unprepared for any threat. Because the dodo nested on the ground, its eggs sat exposed in a way tree-nesting birds elsewhere were not. Within roughly a century of these first encounters, sightings grew increasingly rare across Mauritius, a decline driven less by hunting and far more by this sudden wave of introduced threats the bird had no way to resist. The last widely accepted sighting of a living dodo occurred sometime around the year 1662, though some accounts suggest stragglers may have persisted a few decades beyond that point in more remote parts of the island. This means the dodo likely vanished entirely within less than a century of humans first setting foot on Mauritius, an extraordinarily short span for a species that had otherwise thrived undisturbed for a very long time before that. No complete skeleton of a dodo survives today. Most of what we know comes from partial bones, scattered remains, a few preserved specimens, and the written descriptions and sketches left behind by sailors and early naturalists who encountered the bird firsthand. One of the most complete surviving specimens, a mummified head and foot, is held at the Oxford University Museum of Natural History, offering rare physical evidence beyond bones and second-hand illustration. Much of what artists once depicted, a fat, clumsy, comically shaped bird, likely reflects overfed captive specimens rather than an accurate picture of the dodo in its natural island habitat. The forest, by then, had grown quiet in a different way. Not the quiet of rest, but the quiet of absence, settling gently over ground the dodo would no longer walk. Modern researchers have used these fragmentary remains, combined with careful comparison to living relatives such as pigeons and doves, to reconstruct a more accurate picture of the bird's true proportions and likely movement. This reconstruction suggests a leaner, more upright animal than popular imagination often assumes, closer to a large, powerful ground bird than the round, comical figure familiar from old paintings and cartoons. Even the bird's exact coloring remains only partly certain, drawn from a handful of surviving illustrations made by different artists, at different times, with varying accuracy. Despite these gaps, careful science has slowly replaced myth with a clearer, if still incomplete, understanding of what the dodo truly was. The dodo's diet likely consisted mostly of fallen fruit, seeds, nuts, and small invertebrates found scattered across the forest floor of Mauritius, gathered slowly and steadily during its daily foraging. Its stomach may have contained small stones, called gastroliths, which many ground-feeding birds swallow deliberately to help grind tough plant material during digestion, a strategy still seen in modern pigeons and doves today. The dodo likely built simple ground nests, tucked among vegetation rather than elevated in trees, laying a single large egg at a time, a reproductive strategy that left little room for error if that egg was lost or destroyed. This single-egg strategy, common among many island birds with few natural predators, became a serious vulnerability once rats and other introduced animals began raiding nests across the island in growing numbers. Some historical accounts suggest the dodo could produce a deep, resonant sound, though no recording or precise description survives to confirm exactly what its call truly sounded like to those who once heard it. The forest carried that unknown sound for a while longer, echoing quietly between the trees, before falling permanently silent. The dodo's wings, though useless for flight, likely still played a role in balance and display, possibly used during courtship or simply to help the bird steady itself while moving quickly across uneven ground. Its tail consisted of a small curled tuft of feathers, distinct from the tails of its flighted relatives, another sign of a body gradually reshaped by generations of life without the need to take to the air. Because it evolved in complete isolation from large predators, the dodo also lacked the instinctive alarm behaviors common in many mainland species, such as freezing, scattering, or fleeing at the first sign of a threat. This absence of fear, so often misread by early visitors as simple stupidity, was in fact a finely tuned adaptation to an island world that had never required caution before humans arrived to change it. Mauritius itself formed through volcanic activity roughly 8 million years ago, rising slowly from the ocean floor long before any bird, mammal, or plant had reached its shores to begin shaping a living island ecosystem. The dodo's ancestors likely arrived by flight, carried across the ocean from mainland populations, before gradually losing the ability to fly once they settled permanently within the safety of this predator-free island environment. This pattern, known as island gigantism or flightlessness, has occurred independently many times across evolutionary history, producing similarly grounded birds on isolated islands scattered throughout the world's oceans. The kakapo of New Zealand, though only distantly related, followed a remarkably similar evolutionary path, becoming a large, flightless, ground-dwelling bird shaped by centuries of life without natural predators nearby. Unlike the kakapo, which survives today in carefully protected sanctuaries, the dodo was not so fortunate, vanishing before conservation efforts of any kind existed to intervene on its behalf. The island's quiet forests continued on afterward, adjusting slowly to the absence of a creature that had shaped their undergrowth for countless generations before its sudden disappearance. Some plants on Mauritius may have relied on the dodo for seed dispersal, their fruit passing through the bird's digestive system before germinating elsewhere across the forest floor, a quiet partnership now impossible to fully verify. Without the dodo moving between fruiting trees, certain seeds may have lost one of their most reliable methods of spreading across the island, subtly reshaping the forest structure over the following centuries. Ecologists describe this kind of loss as a hidden extinction, one species disappearing not directly, but through the quiet unraveling of relationships built across thousands of years of shared island life. The forest, patient as ever, simply continued, adapting slowly to a silence it had never expected to hold. The phrase dead as a dodo entered common English usage during the 19th century, long after the bird itself had vanished, becoming a lasting expression for anything considered thoroughly and permanently finished. Lewis Carroll included the dodo as a memorable character in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, a choice believed to reference his own stutter, since he sometimes pronounced his real surname, Dodgson, in a way that echoed the bird's name. This appearance in Carroll's beloved story helped cement the dodo firmly within popular culture, ensuring the bird remained widely recognized long after most people had forgotten the details of its actual biology and history. Over time, popular imagination gradually distorted the dodo's true appearance, exaggerating its clumsiness and rounding its shape into something closer to a caricature than an accurate reflection of the living animal. Early paintings by Dutch artists, often based on overfed captive birds kept far from their native island home, likely contributed heavily to this lasting, somewhat inaccurate impression that persists even today. The real dodo, quieter and more capable than legend suggests, continues to exist mostly in fragments, scattered across old bones, old paintings, and old, half-remembered stories. The word dodo has also found its way into everyday speech, sometimes used to describe someone considered foolish or slow, a linguistic echo of that same old misunderstanding about the bird's true nature. Museums around the world have attempted various physical reconstructions of the dodo over the years, each reflecting the best available science of its era, and each subtly different from the last. Some older museum models, built decades ago from outdated assumptions, still portray a far heavier, more awkward bird than current research suggests was ever biologically accurate. Newer reconstructions, informed by careful bone analysis and comparison with living relatives, increasingly depict a leaner, more upright, more capable animal than popular memory has long remembered. Modern DNA analysis has confirmed the dodo's close relationship to pigeons and doves, settling a long-running scientific debate that once considered links to birds as varied as vultures, ostriches, and even albatrosses. Genetic material has been extracted from preserved dodo remains, allowing scientists to compare its evolutionary lineage against a wide range of living bird species with far greater precision than bone shape alone could ever provide. This genetic confirmation places the dodo firmly within the Columbidae family, alongside familiar birds such as the common pigeon, sharing ancestry despite an enormous difference in size, shape, and flight capability. The Rodriguez solitaire, a close relative of the dodo, lived on a nearby island and shared many similar traits, including flightlessness, though it followed a slightly different evolutionary path shaped by its own separate island environment. Like the dodo, the Rodriguez solitaire also went extinct following human arrival, another quiet reminder of how vulnerable isolated island species became once the wider world's ships finally reached their shores. Both birds, distant island cousins, now exist only through fragments, studied carefully by scientists working patiently to reconstruct lives no living witness remains to describe firsthand. Comparing the dodo and the solitaire has helped researchers understand island evolution, showing how closely related species can diverge dramatically once separated onto different islands with different pressures. The solitaire, unlike the dodo, appears to have retained a more slender build, possibly reflecting differences in food sources or predation risk between the neighboring islands of Mauritius and Rodriguez. These small distinctions matter to scientists, since they reveal how quickly evolution can reshape a body once a population becomes isolated, even across short distances of open ocean. Together, the dodo and its solitaire cousin form a small family of flightless island pigeons, both lost within a similar span of history, remembered now mostly through careful reconstruction. Efforts to bring back extinct species through cloning or genetic engineering, sometimes called de-extinction, have occasionally included the dodo among proposed candidates, though the science required remains extraordinarily difficult. Unlike woolly mammoths, which left frozen tissue samples in permafrost, the dodo's remains are far older and more degraded, offering only fragmented genetic material rather than complete, well-preserved cellular structures. Some scientists have expressed cautious interest in eventually reconstructing a close approximation of the dodo using its living relative, the Nicobar pigeon, as a genetic starting point for careful, gradual modification. Others remain skeptical, noting that recreating a bird's outward appearance would not restore its original ecosystem, its lost behaviors, or the complex island environment it once called home before human arrival changed everything. For now, the dodo remains firmly a creature of the past, studied through bones, preserved fragments, old writings, and careful scientific inference rather than any living, breathing example. The forest floor of Mauritius continues on without it, quietly reshaped by centuries of change since the bird's final disappearance from its ancient island home. Conservationists studying the dodo's extinction often use it as an early, well-documented example of human-driven species loss, one of the clearest historical cases connecting direct human contact to a rapid biological collapse. This makes the dodo an important reference point in modern conservation science, frequently cited in discussions about invasive species, habitat protection, and the vulnerability of isolated island ecosystems. Mauritius today continues efforts to protect its remaining native wildlife, many species still threatened by the same kinds of introduced predators that contributed so heavily to the dodo's disappearance centuries earlier. In this way, the dodo's story continues to shape real conservation decisions, a quiet legacy extending far beyond the bird itself into the protection of species still living today. The dodo has become something of an unofficial national symbol for Mauritius, appearing on the country's coat of arms alongside a Rodriguez solitaire, both extinct birds honored as part of the island's natural heritage. Visitors to Mauritius today can find dodo imagery woven throughout the island's culture, from souvenirs and artwork to the naming of local landmarks, restaurants, and even a well-known brand of local beer. This widespread cultural presence stands in quiet contrast to the bird's actual historical fate, a species now celebrated everywhere except in the one place it could ever truly be found, walking freely across its native forest floor. Some historians view this contrast as a form of quiet remembrance, a way of keeping the dodo present in daily island life even though the living bird itself has been gone for more than 3 centuries now. Local museums in Mauritius display dodo bones, artistic reconstructions, and detailed historical exhibits, helping visitors understand both the bird's biology and the broader lessons its extinction still offers today. The dodo's absence, in this way, has become its own kind of presence, a permanent reminder woven carefully into the island culture that once, briefly, was its only home. International museums beyond Mauritius also continue to display dodo-related exhibits, drawing steady visitor interest from people curious about one of history's most recognizable examples of human-caused extinction. Children's books, documentaries, and educational programs frequently use the dodo as an accessible entry point for teaching lessons about biodiversity, conservation, and the delicate balance of isolated ecosystems. This educational role has kept the dodo relevant across generations, ensuring that even centuries after its disappearance, the bird continues quietly teaching lessons it never could have understood in its own lifetime. In many ways, the dodo has outlived its own extinction through memory alone, becoming more widely known today than almost any other species that vanished during the same historical period. As our journey through these first facts comes to a gentle close, it is worth pausing to consider what the dodo truly represents, beyond punchlines and cartoons, beyond the tired old joke of clumsiness. It represents a species finely tuned to a single quiet island, shaped patiently over millions of years, undone within a single century once the wider world finally arrived at its shore. It represents how fragile isolation can be, how easily an ancient balance can unravel once new pressures appear that evolution never prepared a creature to face or understand in time. And it represents memory itself, a bird now more famous in absence than almost any species remains in presence, teaching quiet lessons about caution, protection, and the value of what still remains around us. 90 more facts about the dodo still lie ahead in the parts to come, each one adding another small piece to this slow, careful portrait of a bird that once walked calmly through warm island forests. For now, let the forest rest. Let the dodo's memory settle gently into the quiet dark, undisturbed, patient, waiting for the next part of its story to begin. Consider, too, how strange it is that a bird gone for over 300 years can still feel so familiar, its silhouette instantly recognized by children who have never once seen a single true image of it. That familiarity is itself a kind of quiet survival, a shape and a story passed carefully forward long after the last living dodo took its final unhurried steps across Mauritius. Perhaps that is the gentlest way to understand this bird tonight, not as a punchline, but as a patient reminder, carried softly forward through fact after fact, story after story, generation after generation. Rest now, if you wish. The remaining 90 facts will still be here, waiting quietly, whenever you are ready to continue this slow, careful journey once again. Welcome back to Mauritius, and to the quiet, patient story of the dodo. Let your shoulders soften, let your breathing slow, as we continue gently through the next set of facts. The dodo's egg was likely quite large relative to its body size, a single investment laid carefully on the forest floor rather than scattered across multiple smaller clutches, as many other birds tend to do. Because only one egg was laid at a time, a breeding pair could only replace their offspring slowly, meaning any disruption to a single nest carried disproportionately heavy consequences for the wider population's survival. Some early sailors reported eating dodo eggs directly, alongside the introduced pigs and monkeys that also learned to raid nests, adding yet another layer of pressure onto an already fragile reproductive cycle. The forest floor nesting site itself was likely chosen for proximity to fruiting trees, minimizing the distance parents needed to travel while still tending closely to their single vulnerable egg. Nothing about this nesting strategy suggested danger for thousands of years. Then, quite suddenly, everything about it became a serious and unanswerable weakness. Researchers estimate that a dodo may have needed several months to raise a single chick to independence, a slow and careful process that left little margin for repeated failure across a breeding season. This slow reproductive pace worked perfectly well in an environment without predators, allowing populations to remain stable for centuries without any need for rapid recovery from occasional losses. Once rats, pigs, and monkeys arrived, this same unhurried pace became a critical flaw, unable to keep up with the sudden, repeated destruction of eggs and chicks across the island. In ecology, this mismatch is sometimes called an evolutionary trap, a pattern once perfectly suited to survival that suddenly becomes a serious liability instead. The dodo's skull, preserved in various museum collections, reveals a surprisingly large brain cavity relative to overall body size, challenging the old, outdated notion that the bird was somehow simple or unintelligent. Modern comparisons suggest the dodo's brain proportions sat well within the normal range expected for pigeons and doves, a family generally recognized among ornithologists for reasonably capable problem-solving behavior. The old myth of dodo stupidity likely arose from its fearlessness around humans, a trait easily mistaken for foolishness, rather than any genuine reflection of the bird's actual cognitive abilities or behavior. Pigeons today, close relatives of the dodo, have demonstrated surprising intelligence in scientific studies, including the ability to recognize individual human faces and even distinguish between different painting styles. If the dodo shared even a modest portion of these cognitive traits, it was likely a far more capable and aware creature than centuries of unfair caricature have generally suggested to the public imagination. The forest floor, quiet and patient, never once needed the dodo to prove its intelligence. It simply needed the bird to survive, which for a very long time, it managed to do rather well. Some naturalists have speculated that the dodo may have used a mental map of its territory, remembering which trees fruited at which times of year, allowing efficient foraging across a familiar, well-known range. This kind of spatial memory is common among many bird species today, particularly those relying on scattered, seasonal food sources rather than one constantly available meal within easy reach. Without written records or direct observation of dodo behavior in the wild, much of this remains careful, informed speculation rather than firmly established fact. Still, the picture that slowly emerges is not of a foolish, clumsy bird, but of a calm, capable animal, well suited to a gentle island life that simply never prepared it for the century that followed. Mauritius, before human arrival, hosted a wide variety of unique species found nowhere else in the world, the dodo being only the most famous member of a much larger, equally fragile island community. Giant tortoises once roamed the island alongside the dodo, slow, armored herbivores that shared the same predator-free environment and faced remarkably similar pressures once humans and introduced animals arrived. Several of these tortoise species also vanished following human contact, though a few closely related tortoises from nearby islands have since been reintroduced to Mauritius as part of ongoing ecological restoration efforts. Flying foxes, a type of large fruit bat, also called Mauritius home, playing an important role in pollination and seed dispersal across the same forests the dodo once quietly wandered each day. Many native Mauritian plants, adapted over millions of years to these specific animal partners, have struggled since losing key seed dispersers, another quiet ripple extending outward from that same wave of extinction. The island, once a thriving example of isolated evolution, now stands as a careful case study in what can be lost when isolation meets sudden, unprepared contact with the wider world. Several unique bird species beyond the dodo also disappeared from Mauritius during this same historical period, including the Mauritius blue pigeon and several native parrot species, each following a similar tragic pattern. These parallel extinctions suggest the dodo's disappearance was not an isolated tragedy, but part of a wider ecological collapse affecting nearly every native species unprepared for humans and their accompanying animals. Conservationists today view Mauritius as a valuable, if painful, lesson in island biology, showing clearly how quickly isolated ecosystems can unravel once their balance is disrupted by outside forces. This lesson continues shaping modern conservation policy on islands worldwide, encouraging stricter biosecurity measures designed specifically to prevent the introduction of predators to similarly vulnerable environments. Early European sailors passing through the Indian Ocean often stopped at Mauritius to resupply, drawn by fresh water, timber, and the easy availability of local wildlife unaccustomed to human presence. The island's location made it a convenient waypoint along established trade routes toward Asia, meaning repeated visits by different ships over many years steadily increased pressure on native species like the dodo. Dutch colonization efforts on Mauritius began in earnest during the early 1600s, bringing permanent settlement, agriculture, and a far more consistent, ongoing human presence than earlier temporary ship visits. This permanent settlement accelerated habitat destruction significantly, as forests were cleared for farming, further reducing the dodo's available territory alongside the existing pressure from introduced predators. Historical Dutch records from this colonial period provide some of the most detailed surviving descriptions of the living dodo, offering valuable, if incomplete, glimpses into its behavior and appearance before extinction. These fragile written accounts remain treasured by historians today, precious windows into a world that would close permanently within just a few short decades of being first recorded. One notable account, written by a Dutch sailor, described the dodo's stomach as containing a stone the size of a fist, likely one of the gastroliths used to help grind tough plant material during digestion. Another described its call as resembling a goose, though modern scientists treat such second-hand descriptions cautiously, aware that memory and translation across centuries can easily distort small but meaningful details. Ship logs from this era also documented steadily declining sightings over successive visits, a slow, quiet pattern historians can now trace clearly across just a few decades of record keeping. By comparing these scattered accounts across different ships and years, researchers have pieced together a rough timeline of the dodo's final decline, even without any single complete record to rely upon. The exact appearance of dodo feathers remains a subject of gentle scientific debate, since surviving illustrations vary noticeably in color, shading, and overall texture depending on the artist and specimen involved. Some accounts describe soft gray plumage, while others suggest a slightly darker, almost blackish tone, particularly around the head and neck, differences that may reflect natural variation between individual birds. Molting patterns, seasonal changes, and even the condition of captive specimens likely contributed to this recorded inconsistency, since many surviving illustrations were based on birds kept far from their natural island habitat. A few surviving paintings show yellowish or cream-colored patches near the tail and wings, details modern reconstructions increasingly try to incorporate for a more historically accurate visual representation. Despite these small uncertainties, the overall picture remains fairly consistent: a large, grayish-brown, flightless bird with a distinctive hooked beak and a small curled tuft where flight feathers once might have been. The forest, patient as always, never needed illustrations to know the dodo. It simply watched the bird pass quietly by, day after unhurried day. Modern feather pigment studies, applied to closely related living species, offer scientists an indirect way to estimate what colors were biologically likely, even without direct pigment samples from dodo remains themselves. This kind of comparative approach has become increasingly common in paleontology and historical zoology, allowing researchers to fill gaps in incomplete records using careful inference from close evolutionary relatives. Illustrators today, working alongside scientific advisors, increasingly favor these evidence-based reconstructions over older, more decorative interpretations passed down through centuries of artistic tradition. The result is a dodo that looks less like a storybook character and more like a plausible, functional animal, shaped by genuine biological reasoning rather than assumption or artistic embellishment. The dodo's feet were equipped with strong, clawed toes, well suited for walking across uneven forest terrain, digging slightly into soil, and possibly helping to defend against smaller threats it occasionally encountered. Unlike birds of prey, these claws were not primarily built for hunting, since the dodo's diet consisted mostly of fruit, seeds, and small invertebrates rather than active pursuit of larger, more mobile prey. Its feet likely also assisted in nest construction, scraping together loose vegetation and soil into a simple mound suitable for holding its single, carefully guarded egg upon the forest floor. Comparative studies of related pigeon species suggest similar foot structures serve multiple purposes, balancing walking efficiency with occasional digging or scratching behavior during foraging and nest preparation. The dodo's overall gait, based on reconstructed skeletal proportions, was likely a steady, confident walk rather than the clumsy waddle so often depicted in outdated popular illustrations and cartoons. Across the quiet forest floor, that steady walk carried the dodo calmly between fruiting trees, following a rhythm shaped by centuries of undisturbed island life. Scientists studying trackway impressions from related ground birds suggest the dodo may have left distinctive footprints in soft soil, though no confirmed fossilized dodo tracks have yet been discovered on Mauritius itself. This absence of preserved footprints is not entirely surprising, given the island's warm, humid climate, which tends to break down soft impressions far more quickly than the drier conditions favorable for fossilization elsewhere. Bone preservation, by contrast, has fared somewhat better, though still limited, since tropical environments generally accelerate decomposition compared to drier regions more commonly associated with fossil records. This combination of climate and time explains much of why dodo remains stay scarce today, a quiet reminder of how fragile physical evidence can be, even for a species gone only a few centuries. The Mauritius swamp on Mauritius has produced the largest single collection of dodo bones ever discovered, offering researchers an unusually rich source of skeletal material for careful, ongoing scientific study. Excavations at this site, conducted across multiple expeditions since the 19th century, have recovered bones from numerous individual birds, allowing scientists to study variation across age, sex, and size within the species. The swamp likely acted as a natural trap, where animals seeking water during dry seasons became stuck in soft mud, preserving their remains far better than the surrounding forest floor ever could. This single location has become invaluable to dodo research, providing far more physical evidence than any other site on the island, and helping correct many earlier assumptions based on limited or damaged specimens. Ongoing analysis of Mauritius bones continues today, with modern scanning and dating techniques revealing new details about growth patterns, health, and population structure among Mauritius's lost dodo population. Beneath that quiet swamp, the past has waited patiently, offering up its secrets slowly, one careful excavation at a time. Radiocarbon dating of bones recovered from Mauritius has helped scientists establish a more precise timeline for the dodo's population decline, narrowing the window of its final years with greater confidence than written records alone allow. Some bones recovered from the site also show signs of disease or injury, offering rare glimpses into the health challenges individual dodos may have faced during their lifetimes on the island. Researchers have also recovered remains of other extinct Mauritian species from the same swamp, painting a fuller picture of the island's lost ecosystem rather than focusing narrowly on the dodo alone. This broader excavation effort has transformed Mauritius into one of the most important paleontological sites in the Indian Ocean, a single swamp holding centuries of quiet, carefully preserved history. Dodo-related fossils have occasionally surfaced in private collections and smaller regional museums, scattered gradually across the world following centuries of specimen trading, gifting, and historical scientific exchange. Tracking down these scattered remains has become its own quiet scientific pursuit, with researchers cataloging bones held in collections across Europe, Mauritius, and beyond in an effort to build a more complete picture. Some historical specimens were lost entirely over the centuries, destroyed by fire, poor storage, or simple neglect, meaning today's scientific understanding rests on whatever fragments happen to survive by careful chance alone. A famous example includes the original stuffed dodo specimen once held at the Oxford Museum, largely destroyed by decay during the 1700s, with only the head and foot deliberately preserved before disposal. This near-total loss remains a sobering reminder of how easily even significant scientific evidence can vanish without careful, deliberate preservation efforts across generations of caretakers and institutions. What remains today, though limited, continues to anchor our understanding of a bird otherwise known almost entirely through second-hand description and careful, patient inference. Modern museums now apply far stricter preservation standards than their historical predecessors, using climate-controlled storage and detailed digital documentation to prevent further loss of these already scarce specimens. Three-dimensional scanning technology has allowed researchers to create detailed digital models of surviving dodo bones, ensuring that even if a physical specimen were damaged, its precise measurements would remain permanently accessible. These digital archives have also made collaboration easier across international research teams, allowing scientists in different countries to study identical, highly accurate bone models without needing to transport fragile original material. In this way, technology has quietly become one of the dodo's most important allies, protecting what little physical evidence remains from the same slow decay that claimed so much of its original historical record. The dodo's feet were sturdy and yellow, ending in strong claws suited for walking across uneven forest ground rather than perching or gripping branches the way many of its flighted relatives commonly do. This foot structure supports the theory that the dodo spent nearly all of its time on the ground, rarely if ever needing to climb or balance on elevated surfaces during its daily search for fallen fruit and seeds. Comparative anatomy studies suggest that dodo's legs were proportionally quite strong, capable of carrying its considerable body weight across long distances of forest floor without excessive strain or fatigue. Some early written accounts describe the dodo as capable of moving quite quickly when necessary, contradicting the slow, clumsy image that later cartoons and illustrations would eventually popularize. This suggests the bird, while unhurried by nature, was not nearly as helpless or awkward as popular memory often assumes, but rather a well-adapted animal suited precisely to its own particular island home. The forest floor still remembers, in a quiet way, the steady rhythm of those sturdy yellow feet, moving patiently between one fallen fruit and the next. Its overall gait likely combined a steady walk with occasional bursts of faster movement, particularly if startled or pursuing a scattering insect across open ground beneath the forest canopy. Modern biomechanical studies, using careful measurements from surviving leg bones, have attempted to estimate the dodo's likely walking speed, suggesting a pace comparable to many similarly sized ground-dwelling birds today. These studies further challenge the outdated image of a slow, bumbling creature, replacing it with a picture of a confident, capable animal well suited to its forest environment. Such careful biomechanical reconstruction represents one of the quieter triumphs of modern dodo research, slowly replacing centuries of caricature with patient, evidence-based understanding. As we reach the close of this second set of facts, it is worth returning once more to the quiet forest of Mauritius, imagining the dodo moving calmly through dappled shade beneath ancient trees. We have learned about its egg, its skull, its feet, its likely speed, and the slow, careful reproductive rhythm that once served it perfectly, until the world arrived and changed everything all at once. We have seen how science continues patiently piecing together fragments, replacing old caricature with careful evidence, restoring a small measure of dignity to a bird long reduced to punchline in cartoon. 20 facts down, 80 more still remain, each one another small window into a life lived quietly on a warm island, undisturbed for centuries before disappearing so suddenly and so completely. The dodo asks for nothing from us now, except perhaps a little patience, a little curiosity, and the quiet willingness to see it clearly, as it truly was, rather than as legend chose to remember it. Let the forest rest again for now. The next 30 facts will be waiting, patient as ever, whenever you are ready to continue this slow journey once more. Consider, for a moment, how much has already changed in our understanding since those first mocking sailor accounts, replaced gradually by genetics, biomechanics, and careful comparative anatomy. Each new study adds one more small correction to the record, gently nudging the dodo away from caricature and closer toward the calm, capable creature it most likely truly was. There is a particular kind of comfort in this slow correction, a reminder that even centuries after a species disappears, patient attention can still restore some fairness to how it is remembered. Rest now, if you wish, letting these 20 facts settle quietly into memory, before the story continues gently onward into its next patient chapter. Its story, tragic as it is, has quietly helped shape how humanity thinks about loss, permanence, and the fragile boundaries between a living species and one gone forever. The dodo's brain, examined through preserved skull specimens, shows proportions broadly comparable to other pigeons of similar body size, suggesting reasonably typical cognitive capability rather than any unusual simplicity. This finding directly contradicts centuries of popular assumption that the dodo was somehow uniquely foolish among birds, an idea likely born more from its fearlessness around humans than from any true measure of intelligence. Fearlessness and intelligence, after all, are entirely separate qualities, and an animal raised for generations without predators has little reason to develop caution, regardless of how capable its mind may otherwise be. Modern comparative studies of pigeon cognition reveal surprisingly sophisticated abilities, including memory, basic problem solving, and social recognition, traits likely shared to some degree by their now extinct island relative. This reassessment has slowly shifted scientific and public perception alike, replacing the old image of a stupid, doomed bird with a more accurate picture of a reasonably capable animal caught entirely unprepared by sudden change. The forest floor, quiet and shaded, once held a creature far more thoughtful than legend ever gave it credit for being. Some researchers now suggest that dodo may have used simple problem solving to locate hidden fruit, remember productive feeding areas, or navigate familiar paths across its home territory with practiced efficiency. This kind of spatial memory is common among many ground foraging birds, allowing them to return reliably to reliable food sources without wasting energy on random, inefficient searching across unfamiliar ground. If the dodo indeed possessed such abilities, it suggests a far richer inner life than the flat, cartoonish image most people carry, one shaped by careful navigation rather than aimless wandering. Reconsidering the dodo's intelligence in this way adds a final layer of quiet dignity to a bird whose reputation has suffered for centuries under an unfair and largely inaccurate stereotype. Beyond fruit and seeds, the dodo may have occasionally consumed small crustaceans or shellfish found near the island's coastal areas, supplementing its diet during certain seasons when inland food grew scarce. This possibility remains somewhat speculative, based mostly on comparison with related pigeon species and general assumptions about opportunistic feeding behavior common among many ground-dwelling island birds. The dodo likely also swallowed small stones deliberately, using them within its gizzard to help grind tougher plant material, a digestive strategy still commonly observed among modern pigeons and doves today. Some preserved gizzard stones, discovered alongside dodo remains at certain archaeological sites, offer physical evidence supporting this particular digestive theory more directly than most other aspects of its biology. These small stones, unremarkable on their own, provide a rare tangible link to the bird's actual daily behavior, a small physical trace of ordinary life rather than second-hand written description. The forest floor, scattered with pebbles and fallen fruit, once served as both dining table and quiet workshop for a bird patiently managing its own careful digestion. This gizzard stone strategy, called gastrolith use, appears across a wide range of unrelated species, from modern birds to certain reptiles, and even some extinct dinosaurs known through fossil evidence. Its presence in the dodo simply confirms how deeply this useful digestive trick runs through evolutionary history, connecting the extinct island bird to a far older and much broader natural pattern. Examining these small stones alongside the dodo's bones allows researchers to build a slightly richer picture of its daily routine, moving beyond appearance toward genuine biological behavior. Even something as humble as a swallowed pebble can carry scientific weight, quietly bridging the gap between speculation and confirmed evidence in the patient study of extinct species. Several historical paintings of the dodo were created not from live observation on Mauritius itself, but from captive specimens transported to Europe, where they were kept and displayed as curious living exhibits. These transported birds likely suffered from poor diet, inadequate care, and unfamiliar climate conditions, factors that may have caused unnatural weight gain and contributed heavily to the exaggerated, overfed appearance seen in many old paintings. At least one live dodo is believed to have been displayed in London during the early 1600s, drawing curious crowds eager to see a bird already considered strange and exotic even during its own lifetime. Records of such captive dodos remain frustratingly incomplete, often mentioned only briefly within broader historical documents rather than described in any careful, dedicated naturalist account of the period. This scarcity of reliable first-hand description means much of what we think we know about the living dodo actually comes from these unusual, likely unhealthy captive individuals rather than truly wild specimens. The wild dodo, healthier and leaner, continued its quiet life on Mauritius, largely unaware of its strange, unwell cousins being displayed so curiously across distant European cities. This disconnect between captive and wild specimens created a lasting scientific problem, one that took centuries and careful bone analysis to properly untangle from the exaggerated art it originally inspired. Some art historians now study these old dodo paintings less as accurate biological records and more as fascinating cultural artifacts, revealing how 17th century Europe understood and depicted unfamiliar exotic creatures. This shift in interpretation allows scientists and historians to appreciate the paintings for what they truly are, valuable historical documents rather than reliable guides to the dodo's living appearance. Understanding this distinction helps modern audiences see past centuries of visual exaggeration toward the leaner, more capable bird that current research increasingly suggests once existed. Some of the earliest scientific descriptions of the dodo appeared in ship logs and travel journals rather than formal naturalist publications, reflecting how casually the bird was first encountered and recorded by passing sailors. These informal accounts often mixed genuine observation with exaggeration or second-hand rumor, making it difficult for later historians to separate reliable detail from simple storytelling embellishment added along the way. Despite these limitations, careful modern scholars have cross-referenced multiple independent accounts, gradually identifying consistent details likely to reflect genuine observation rather than isolated exaggeration or error. This careful cross-referencing process resembles detective work more than traditional biology, piecing together small consistent clues scattered across centuries of imperfect historical documentation. Through this patient process, a clearer picture of the dodo has slowly emerged, built not from any single perfect source but from the careful accumulation of many small, individually imperfect pieces. The forest, long gone quiet, continues speaking softly through these scattered historical fragments, patiently pieced back together by generations of careful researchers. Some of the most valuable early accounts came from Dutch East India Company sailors, whose ships regularly stopped at Mauritius to restock supplies during long voyages between Europe and Asia. These brief stopovers, often lasting only days or weeks, still produced enough scattered observation over the decades to leave a rough but useful outline of the dodo's appearance and general behavior. Historians studying these company records have found occasional detailed passages amid otherwise mundane logistical entries, small unexpected windows into a bird already becoming increasingly rare during that very period. Piecing together these brief, scattered mentions across many different ships and voyages remains one of the quieter, more painstaking achievements of modern dodo scholarship. As this third set of facts comes to its gentle close, we have wandered through plumage, chicks, sister islands, contested trees, shifting scientific understanding, and old, well-meaning but often inaccurate paintings. 30 facts now rest quietly behind us, each one another careful thread woven into the larger, patient portrait of a bird once dismissed too easily as simple, clumsy, or unremarkable. What emerges instead, fact by fact, is a picture of an animal finely adapted to its island world, undone not by any personal flaw, but by a rapid change no evolution could have possibly prepared it to face. 70 facts still remain ahead, each one another small window into biology, history, culture, and the quiet, ongoing scientific effort to understand a creature gone now for well over 3 centuries. There is no rush in this telling, no need to hurry towards some dramatic conclusion. Like the dodo itself once did, we are simply moving steadily, patiently, through one quiet fact after another. Let the forest rest once more. The next set of facts will still be here, waiting patiently, whenever you feel ready to continue this long, gentle journey. Consider, as this section closes, how ordinary the dodo's daily life likely was, walking, foraging, resting, breeding, entirely unremarkable to itself, yet endlessly fascinating to us now in hindsight. That ordinary quality is, in its own way, part of the tragedy, a completely unremarkable existence interrupted permanently by forces the bird could never have anticipated or resisted. It is also part of the comfort this story can offer, a reminder that even the quietest, most ordinary creatures deserve careful attention, patient study, and honest, accurate remembrance. Rest now, if you wish, letting these 30 facts settle gently into memory before the story continues onward into its next unhurried chapter. Welcome back once more to the quiet island of Mauritius, where the patient story of the dodo continues gently onward through its next careful set of facts. The dodo's overall body shape likely helped it conserve energy efficiently, a useful trait on an island where food, while plentiful, still required steady daily effort to locate and consume across scattered forest ground. Its rounded torso may have also provided some insulation against occasional cooler nights, helping regulate body temperature without the added metabolic cost of maintaining flight muscles it no longer needed. Losing the ability to fly freed considerable energy that could instead be redirected toward growth, reproduction, and simple day-to-day survival within its safe, predator-free island environment. This kind of energetic trade-off appears repeatedly across evolutionary history, wherever isolated animals lose costly abilities no longer necessary for their particular, sheltered environment. The forest floor asked little of the dodo beyond patience, and patience, fortunately, was something its body seemed almost perfectly designed to provide. This energy-efficient design likely allowed the dodo to survive periods of reduced food availability more comfortably than many flighted birds, which must constantly fuel the enormous metabolic demands of powered flight. Grounded life, in this sense, offered its own quiet advantages, trading the freedom of the sky for a steadier, more economical way of moving through an already generous island environment. Researchers studying similar flightless island birds today, such as the kakapo, note comparable metabolic patterns, suggesting this trade-off represents a consistent, repeatable evolutionary strategy rather than a rare exception. Understanding these energetic principles helps explain why flightlessness, despite its obvious risks, evolved so reliably and repeatedly wherever island life offered enough safety to make the trade worthwhile. Some of the earliest surviving dodo illustrations were created by Dutch artist Roland Savory, whose paintings from the early 1600s remain among the most frequently referenced historical images of the bird. Savory likely worked from a combination of live captive specimens, preserved remains, and possibly other artists' work, blending multiple sources into the single, now iconic image many people still associate with the dodo today. His paintings often placed the dodo alongside other exotic animals, reflecting a broader European fascination with distant, unfamiliar wildlife during an era of expanding maritime trade and exploration. Art historians studying Savory's work note subtle inconsistencies between different paintings, suggesting he adjusted details over time, possibly based on new information or simply artistic interpretation and personal preference. Despite these inconsistencies, Savory's depictions became so widely copied and referenced that they effectively defined the dodo's popular image for centuries, long after more accurate scientific reconstruction became possible. This lasting artistic influence shows how powerfully a single, memorable image can shape lasting public perception, sometimes outlasting the more accurate evidence that later emerges. Modern researchers now treat Savory's paintings as valuable historical artifacts rather than precise biological reference, useful for understanding period perception rather than confirming exact anatomical accuracy. Comparing his work against surviving skeletal remains has helped scientists identify which artistic details likely reflect genuine observation and which probably resulted from stylistic choice or simple creative embellishment. This careful comparison illustrates how art history and biology can work together productively, each field offering tools the other lacks when reconstructing a species known only through fragments. Savory's paintings, whatever their inaccuracies, remain an important part of the dodo's story, a lasting bridge between a vanished living bird and centuries of curious human imagination. The dodo shared its island home with a variety of other unique species, many of which also face steep population declines following the same wave of human settlement and introduced predators. Giant Mauritius tortoises, once common across the island, suffered similarly devastating declines, hunted for food by sailors and settlers who found them easy, slow-moving sources of fresh meat during long voyages. Native Mauritius parakeets and other endemic birds also struggled following habitat loss and introduced predators, though some, unlike the dodo, managed to survive in greatly reduced numbers into the modern era. This broader pattern of island-wide decline illustrates that the dodo's extinction was not an isolated tragedy, but part of a much larger, interconnected ecological collapse affecting the entire Mauritius ecosystem simultaneously. Understanding this wider context helps modern conservationists appreciate the scale of change the island experienced, and why protecting remaining native species now requires such careful, comprehensive ecological planning. The forest, once home to so many unique creatures, continues today in a much altered form, still carrying quiet echoes of everything it has lost. Some Mauritius species, such as the pink pigeon and the Mauritius kestrel, came remarkably close to extinction themselves before dedicated conservation efforts helped stabilize their populations in more recent decades. These successful recovery stories offer a hopeful contrast to the dodo's fate, showing that with enough careful intervention, even severely threatened island species can sometimes be pulled back from the very edge of loss. Conservationists studying these recoveries often reference the dodo directly, using its story as a cautionary reminder of what happens when protective action arrives too late for a struggling population. In this way, the dodo's absence continues to shape present-day decisions, its quiet legacy woven directly into the ongoing effort to protect the island's remaining fragile wildlife. The dodo's extinction eventually inspired the phrase dodo clause in certain areas of environmental law and policy, a shorthand reference used to describe protections aimed at preventing similarly avoidable species losses. While not a formal legal term in most jurisdictions, this informal usage reflects how deeply the dodo has become embedded within broader conservation language, well beyond its original scientific or historical context. Environmental educators frequently use the dodo as a memorable entry point for discussing modern conservation challenges, finding that its recognizable name and story help audiences engage more easily with otherwise complex ecological concepts. This educational usage extends well beyond formal classrooms, appearing in museum exhibits, documentary narration, and countless children's books designed to introduce young audiences to ideas about extinction and biodiversity. The dodo's simple, memorable story continues doing quiet educational work, decades and centuries after the bird itself vanished from the forests it once called home. Its name, once merely describing a bird, now carries an entire weight of ecological meaning far beyond anything the animal itself could have ever represented alone. Some conservation organizations have even adopted dodo imagery directly into their branding and campaigns, using the bird's recognizable silhouette to symbolize urgency around protecting currently endangered species worldwide. This symbolic usage carries a certain quiet irony, since the very fame that keeps the dodo memorable came only after it was already lost, a reminder arriving centuries too late to help the bird itself. Perhaps this irony is part of what makes the dodo such an effective symbol, a visible, permanent reminder of what protective action delayed too long can ultimately cost an entire species. In borrowing its image, modern conservation efforts quietly honor the dodo by trying to ensure other species do not share its same, now permanently unchangeable fate. Scientific classification of the dodo changed several times throughout history, as naturalists debated its proper place within the broader bird family tree using whatever limited evidence happened to be available at the time. Early naturalists sometimes grouped it alongside ostriches and other large flightless birds, reasoning based primarily on overall size and flightlessness rather than any deeper structural or genetic similarity between the species. Later anatomical study gradually shifted this classification toward the pigeon and dove family instead, a conclusion eventually confirmed decisively through modern genetic analysis performed on preserved tissue samples. This taxonomic journey illustrates how scientific understanding evolves gradually over time, correcting itself repeatedly as new tools and evidence become available to researchers studying the same enduring mystery. The dodo's formal scientific name, Rhapis cucullatus, reflects this settled modern classification, cucullatus referring to the hood-like feathers once thought to surround its head in early illustrations. Even its name, carefully chosen through careful scholarly debate, carries within it centuries of patient scientific correction and refinement. The genus name Rhapis derives from an older term once used to describe the bird, while cucullatus specifically references the hood-shaped feathering that early observers believed covered its head and neck. Taxonomists continue occasionally revisiting such historical names, checking them against modern genetic and anatomical evidence to ensure classification remains as accurate as current science allows. This ongoing process of taxonomic review applies not only to the dodo, but to countless other species, extinct and living alike, as scientific understanding continues its slow, careful advancement over time. The dodo's settled classification today stands as a small, quiet monument to this patient process, a name finally matched carefully to genuine biological evidence rather than early guesswork alone. Climate on Mauritius remains warm and humid year-round, shaped heavily by its tropical location and consistent ocean influence, conditions that likely suited the dodo's biology throughout its entire evolutionary history. Seasonal rainfall variation, rather than dramatic temperature shifts, likely represented the most significant environmental change the dodo regularly experienced, directly influencing fruit availability across different times of year. Cyclones occasionally passed across the region, bringing intense rainfall and strong winds capable of damaging forest canopy and temporarily disrupting the steady supply of fallen fruit the dodo relied upon for sustenance. Such storms, while disruptive, were likely a normal, survivable part of island life, something the dodo's biology had already adapted to endure across countless previous generations before human arrival changed everything else. Modern Mauritius continues experiencing similar seasonal cyclone activity today, a persistent reminder that the island's climate patterns have remained largely consistent even as its wildlife has changed so dramatically. The forest still bends occasionally under strong seasonal winds, much as it once did when the dodo still walked quietly beneath its ancient, sheltering canopy. Researchers studying historical climate patterns believe Mauritius experienced relatively stable conditions for thousands of years before human settlement, allowing the dodo's slow, unhurried biology ample time to develop undisturbed. This long climatic stability likely contributed to the island's broader biodiversity, supporting not only the dodo but numerous other unique species adapted specifically to Mauritius's rainfall, temperature, and seasonal rhythm. Sudden environmental change, when it eventually arrived, came not through climate itself, but through the direct and indirect consequences of human settlement disrupting this previously stable natural balance. This distinction matters, clarifying that the dodo's extinction resulted from ecological disruption rather than any broader climatic shift affecting the island during that period. Modern replica dodo skeletons, carefully assembled from scans of surviving bones held across multiple museum collections, now allow researchers and the public alike to view a complete, accurate physical reconstruction. These composite skeletons combine bone measurements from several different specimens, since no single complete dodo skeleton survives fully intact within any one collection anywhere in the world today. Creating such a composite requires extremely careful measurement and comparison, ensuring proportions remain biologically accurate even when individual bones come from entirely separate historical specimens. This painstaking reconstruction work represents one of the more technically impressive achievements in dodo research, blending traditional anatomy with modern digital scanning and careful three-dimensional modeling techniques. Visitors to museums displaying these composite skeletons can now see, for the first time in centuries, an accurate physical impression of how the dodo's full body was actually proportioned and structured. This achievement offers a small but meaningful form of restoration, allowing the dodo's true shape to stand visible once more after centuries of exaggeration and caricature. Some of these composite skeletons now travel between museums as part of temporary exhibits, offering audiences in different countries a rare opportunity to see this careful reconstruction firsthand without international travel. Digital versions of these skeletal models have also become available online, allowing researchers, students, and curious members of the public anywhere to examine the dodo's true proportions from home. This democratization of access represents a meaningful shift in how extinct species can be studied and appreciated, moving scientific understanding beyond the walls of any single museum collection. Through these careful reconstructions, the dodo continues offering something valuable long after its extinction, a patient lesson in how thorough, careful science can still restore accuracy to a widely misunderstood creature. The dodo's story has occasionally appeared in scientific papers discussing broader concepts like shifting baseline syndrome, where each generation gradually forgets how abundant certain species once truly were. This concept helps explain why modern people sometimes underestimate historical wildlife abundance, since each generation tends to accept whatever reduced state of nature they personally witnessed as the normal baseline. The dodo represents an especially clear example of this pattern, given how thoroughly and quickly it vanished, leaving almost no living memory to accurately convey what its natural abundance once genuinely looked like. Conservation researchers frequently cite the dodo when explaining shifting baseline syndrome to students, using its total, well-documented disappearance as a clear, memorable illustration of this broader psychological pattern. Understanding this concept helps modern conservation efforts recognize how easily society can lose sight of genuine ecological loss, mistaking a diminished present for a naturally stable, unchanging baseline. The dodo, absent now for centuries, quietly reminds us how important it remains to measure nature against its true historical abundance rather than our own limited, recent memory. This lesson extends well beyond Mauritius, applying equally to forests, fisheries, and wildlife populations across the entire modern world, wherever historical abundance has quietly faded from common awareness. Environmental historians increasingly rely on old records, journals, and specimens, much like those describing the dodo, to help reconstruct accurate historical baselines against which current conservation efforts can be measured. This careful historical reconstruction work often reveals surprising truths, showing many ecosystems once supported far greater abundance and diversity than most people today would ever casually assume. In this way, the dodo's story continues offering broader value, helping shape how modern science approaches memory, measurement, and the true scale of ecological change across generations. As we approach the final part of this long, patient journey, it feels fitting to pause and reflect on everything the dodo's quiet story has already offered across these many gentle facts. We have explored its anatomy, its likely behavior, its rapid extinction, its tangled cultural legacy, and the careful modern science slowly working to correct centuries of exaggeration and misunderstanding. Through all of this, one truth remains consistent, that the dodo was never truly foolish or clumsy, but simply an animal perfectly suited to a peaceful island world it could never have known would change so completely. Its extinction, one of history's clearest examples of human impact on isolated ecosystems, continues teaching quiet lessons about caution, protection, and the fragile balance every island species depends upon. 90 of our 100 facts now rest gently behind us, each one another careful thread woven patiently into this long, unhurried portrait of a bird finally being remembered accurately. Just 10 facts remain, waiting quietly ahead, ready to bring this long, gentle journey through the dodo's story to its final, peaceful close. Consider, for a moment, how far our understanding has traveled since those first mocking sailor accounts, replaced gradually by genetics, biomechanics, careful art history, and patient conservation science. Each correction along the way has added a little more fairness to how the dodo is remembered, slowly transforming punchline into portrait, caricature into careful, evidence-based understanding. This transformation did not happen quickly or easily, requiring centuries of scattered effort from naturalists, historians, and scientists working patiently across many different countries and generations. Rest here for a moment, if you wish, letting these 90 facts settle quietly into memory before the final 10 bring this long, careful story gently toward its close. Here, at last, we reach the final 10 facts of our long, patient journey through the quiet life and lasting legacy of the dodo, a bird once so easily dismissed, now finally understood more clearly. The dodo lived, ate, rested, and raised its single chick across countless unremarkable, peaceful days on Mauritius, entirely unaware that its species carried any particular historical significance at all. Its extinction, arriving within less than a century of first human contact, remains one of the fastest and most thoroughly documented losses of a large, distinct species in recorded human history. Modern science, through careful bone analysis, genetic testing, and patient historical research, has slowly restored dignity to a creature long reduced to little more than a punchline in cartoon. The dodo now stands not as a symbol of foolishness, but as a quiet, permanent reminder of how quickly isolated ecosystems can unravel once unfamiliar pressures arrive without warning or preparation. Its memory continues shaping real conservation decisions today, protecting other vulnerable island species from repeating the same swift, irreversible fate that once quietly overtook the dodo itself. We have wandered together through anatomy and extinction, through folklore and careful science, through old paintings and new digital reconstructions, one gentle fact after another, without ever needing to hurry. The forest of Mauritius continues today, changed but still standing, still shaded, still quietly cradling the memory of a bird that once walked calmly beneath its ancient, patient canopy. Perhaps somewhere, in some small quiet corner of that forest, the ordinary rhythm the dodo once knew still lingers faintly, carried gently in fallen fruit, drifting leaves, and softly turning seasons. Let this be where our long, patient journey finally comes to rest. 100 facts told slowly, gently, exactly as such a quiet story deserves. Sleep well, and let the forest hold you now. And so we come to the end of our long, quiet journey through the life of the dodo. Tonight we wandered together through warm island forests, fallen fruit, sturdy yellow feet, old paintings, and patient modern science slowly setting the record straight. We met a bird that was never truly foolish, only unprepared for a world that changed far too quickly around it. We saw how memory, once distorted by legend and caricature, can slowly be restored through careful, honest attention. Perhaps that is the gentlest thing this story can leave you with tonight. Not sadness, not loss, but a quiet kind of care, the same care this channel hopes to offer you as you drift off to sleep. If you enjoyed this slow journey through the dodo's world, you can always leave a like, subscribe to the channel, or share a thought below. It helps more sleepy minds find their way here, one quiet story at a time. And if you happen to still be awake, there will always be another gentle journey waiting for you next time. But for now, there is nothing more you need to do. Just rest. Let your breathing slow. Let the forest hold you a little while longer. Sleep well, and good night.